As we grow closer to the end of the church's calendar year, which begins at Advent each year, we begin hearing about the most important things, the ends of time, and we hear from Jesus today the most important message, the bottom line. You know, it's a uniquely American expression, and it's less than 50 years old, and it comes from the world of accounting. You know, what's the bottom line? What's when you added up everything and subtracted and multiplied and divided and you've summed up the entire thing, what is the final answer? It's something we're paying attention to as we get closer to an election. It's something that baseball games and World Series and football games all try to resolve. You know, what's the winner? Who's the winner? What's the answer? Fact checkers are trying to say, what's the truth? And if you've ever gone to school or taught school, you know that the most important question is, what's on the test? That the bottom line is the most important thing. Well, that's what we get today when a scribe in the Gospel of Mark comes up to Jesus and says, much like an American today, just cut to the chase, Jesus. What's the most important thing? And the answer that Jesus gave is one that we heard in the second reading today, and it starts with the Shema, the great Jewish prayer. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is Lord alone. Now for the Jews, they would translate it, the Lord is one. But we who believe in a triune God say it's God alone. That God alone is the one that you have to worship. And then he comes up with the second part, which is love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your strength, and your mind. And that's pretty challenging in and of itself, because it's not simply, just, make sure you burn the offerings to our God and make sure you appeased him, as many, other cultures and pagan cultures would do. You keep the gods happy and that's all you have to worry about. But Jesus, quoting scripture, says, you've got to love the Lord your God with every part of your being. Every part of your being. And then he gets to the third part, which is wonderful for a triune religion. There's one God. Love him with your whole heart, your mind, your body, and your strength. And then the third part, which is the most challenging, love your neighbor as yourself. And the twist is that just like the Trinity, these aren't three distinct things. That Jesus isn't saying, well, first you got to do this, then you got to do that, then you got to do this, as if there are three distinct things you have to do. There's one thing you have to do. Love God alone with all your strength and love your neighbor. And it's not like this and that. It's this is how you do that. That the way you love God is by loving your neighbor. They're not, separable. That loving your neighbor is the way that we're called to love God. It's the bottom line. It's boil it down to its essence. Our faith is that we are called to love one another as Christ taught us. That is how we love God. If we try to love God and ignore the hungry at the door and think ill of people who are different from us and try to make divisions and separations and go to war against people. If we say we love God, but then we do all these things that go against our neighbor, we do not love God. That's the bottom line. No matter how many times you go to church, no matter how many rosaries you pray, no matter how many hours you spend in front of the tabernacle, if you do not love your neighbor, you are not truly loving God. That's the great challenge. That's the great message that Jesus teaches us. That we are to love only God with our whole heart, soul, mind, and strength. And that we do that by loving our neighbor. God's not an add-on. He's not an app. He's not just something you add to it. That in our relationship with God, we are tied to our neighbor. Here at Andre Bassett, we know that acutely. That's the number one reason why this church is here. Because we have felt compelled to love our neighbor, to care for those in need, to provide what we can for those who come to our door. This is how we love God, the God who is one.